If I would have come a little earlier, I would have got a glimpse of my beloved teacher. Last one, hopefully you get this right because we've looked at this in detail. So I don't think you should take a lot of time for this question to answer this question. Okay, same thing, easy one. The error is in part A, third conditional form again, because the second conditional is right there. Would have plus past participle got is there, which means I just need a past perfect tense in the first part, which is A, right? I don't need would have again. So what do I change that to? If I had come, right? Past perfect, that's it. I would have got a glimpse of my beloved teacher. So summing up, if conditional errors, especially the third conditional, I need to be familiar or thorough with the form, one. I also need to look out for exchange of clauses. If does not necessarily have to start the sentence, it can come in the second clause as well. So I need to accordingly choose where the error is, right? And the third one, also be familiar with the other expression, had I done this or had I been there, right? That's also another way of saying if I had. It takes up the same form as if plus past perfect. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. If I would have been there, I certainly would have taken care of the problem. As soon as you read the sentence, what's the concept that comes to mind for you in terms of error type? What are we talking about here? Obviously, we're referring to if conditionals, right? Absolutely. So where is the error? In terms of form, what conditional is this? Can somebody identify what conditional this is? Would have taken. Would have plus past participle. Which condition is this? Conditional is this? If conditionals, first, second or third? Which one is it? That's my question. It's a third conditional. So what is the form for the third conditional? If plus the first clause is past perfect. But in A, if you notice, it has the second clause form, would have, which obviously is incorrect. I need to change that to past perfect. So what will I change here in part A? What will become of part A? The error is undoubtedly in part A, and if the second clause is in line with what is needed, because I have would have plus the past participle is the third form of take, right? Take, took, taken. Verb 1, verb 2, verb 3. And for my past participle, I always take the third verb. So that is correct. So which means I only have to change part A. How do I change if I would have to past perfect? If I had been there, right? So I don't need would have. If I had been there, I certainly would have taken care of the problem. So the error is in part A and I need to change. I don't need would have again because we're talking about the third if conditional form here, and the third if conditional form is this, right? Immediately what you need to do is you need to be familiar with the forms, right? Whether it's first conditional, second conditional or third conditional, I need to know the form. So if I know the form in fact should be something that you know by heart. If I would have had more time, I would have prepared a much more detailed report. So this one shouldn't be difficult for you. We just saw something on the same lines in our first example. So can you quickly identify where the error is? It's the same concept, right? We again talking about the third conditional form because I have the second clause which has would have plus the past participle which is prepared, which means again I need if plus past perfect, and the past perfect form of have is had, right? If I had more time. So the error again is in part A. I would have prepared a much more detailed report. Again, we're talking about a third conditional and this is the form. Quite easy. And most of us have a problem with this had expression, right? It seems funny, it seems grammatically incorrect, but this is the right construction because had is nothing but You know, it's almost like the second had substitutes for another main verb. Yeah, let's look at an example sentence just to explain this to you. I could say, when Raj arrived, everyone had had dinner, right? So this had is nothing but where I'm saying, obviously we're talking about, you know, when two actions happen in the past, the first action is always in the past perfect tense, right? That's why it's had. And then the second action is in the simple past tense. So having said that, this had, the second had is basically replacing the main verb. When Raj arrived, everyone had what? Eaten dinner, right? It's substituting this past participle main verb, which is nothing but they had dinner already, which means they ate dinner. They had eaten dinner. That's what it means. So the second had is basically substituting the meaning of the main verb, which is eat. Yeah, so had is nothing but the past perfect tense of have. And this is something that, so these sort of constructions are correct, grammatically accurate. There's nothing wrong with had coming together. Yeah, can you think of your own example sentence and maybe give me one or two with had now that I've explained it? I'll give you another example. So I can say, before I got here, I had too many chocolates, right? Again, the second had is replacing or substituting the main verb eaten. Before I got here, I had eaten too many chocolates. I had had too many chocolates, right? So just to put it in context, so you guys don't get confused. So here again, the error is in part A. If I had had more time, I would have prepared a much more detailed report. Let's look at another variation when it comes to if conditional errors. Check this one out. Your employer would have been inclined to favor your request if you would have waited for an occasion when he was less busy. Your employer would have been inclined to favor your request if you would have waited for an occasion when he was less busy. I'm just going to give you 15 seconds again. See if you are able to identify where the error is. So basically, in this context, if you see, they've just shifted the part, right? Because if starts here. If you would have waited for an occasion when he was less busy, your employer would have been inclined to favor your request. So what's happened here is, it's just that they've shifted the first and the second clause, right? That is something that can happen. Construction wise, it's grammatically accurate to do that. Just to highlight this, let me go to the previous sentence. So I can still say, I would have prepared a much more detailed report if I had had more time, right? I can switch the entire clauses. The meaning will still be intact. That's what has happened in this particular example context, right? So, which means I still need to identify that the error is not in part A, but the error is actually in part C again, right? Because have been inclined is our second clause, right? Would have been inclined is our second clause. For the first clause, I need if I or you. In this case, the subject is you, so not I. Let's just change that. If you had waited, okay? Past perfect, had waited. If you had waited, past perfect, right? So if you had waited for an occasion when he was less busy, your employer would have been inclined to favor your request. So the error is in part C. So don't get confused when the clauses are interchanged, as in the positions of the clauses change. What do I mean by clause? One complete thought, right? So for example, your employer would have been inclined to favor your request is one clause, okay? If you would have waited for an occasion when he was less busy is another clause. It's a complete thought. So when the clauses interchange, don't get confused, right? You can't always go by, okay, whenever there is a hypothetical sentence and it starts with if, right, I always have to look at part A being where the error is. No. In this context, it's part C. So you change you would have waited to if you had waited. Had I have been in my boss's position, I would have hung up the phone in the middle of the conversation. Had I have been in my boss's position, I would have hung up the phone in the middle of the conversation. Again, if I look at the second clause, I have would have hung up, right? Which means would have plus past participle. But as per the third conditional form, I need if plus past perfect, right? So what do I change here? The error is in part A. Why? Because sometimes another expression that means the same. So all I need to do is just delete this have here. Had I been, right? Basically, had I been is another way of saying if I had been, where had been is the past perfect tense. If I had been in my boss's position, or had I been in my boss's position, another way of saying this is if I were in my boss's position, right? Are you following? So you will see this other way of how if plus past perfect also takes up the form of had I been, right? So the error is in part A, where you just delete have. Had I been in my boss's position, meaning if I had been in my boss's position or if I were in my boss's position, I would have hung up the phone in the middle of the conversation. What I want you guys to always keep in mind is do not deviate from the form, right? You know the form. If plus past perfect, would have plus past participle. That's it. If would have plus past participle is intact in the second clause or in the first clause, wherever it comes, depending on how the sentence is constructed and what they've put first. Like the sentence does not always have to start with if. If can come in the middle also. We just saw the previous example, right? So you need to only look for the form. If the second clause form is correct, would have plus past participle, don't do anything there. You don't have to change anything there, right? But what is incorrect is the first clause. Had I have been, incorrect. Had I been or if I had been, yeah? That's the answer. So the error is in part A. You just delete have and that's about it. So far most of your errors pertain to if conditionals happens with third conditional form. It's also good to know second conditional, first conditional form also, because you might get errors from that as well. But for the most part, it's from the third conditional, which means all you have to do is just remember the form, yeah, and know other variations to the if plus past perfect, like had I been also is correct.